The End of the Marine, Part 1, Chapter 7, Part 1. I should mention Janice. There is little to say. She would never call, and I would get her on the phone probably once every 3 times I called. She would never respond to texts. As the marriage counselors would say, the conversations were transactional. Are you paying the bills? The check engine light has been on for a few weeks. Have you been in the basement to see if the sump pump is still working? Will we be getting a bump in pay moving to Shanghai? I tried to find out how her work was going. Was she doing anything fun? Did she miss me? Fine, not really, of course. It is not like the relationship was deepening, or that our hearts were growing fonder. And she kept begging off that she would not be able to get any time off if I were to visit, and you have so much studying to do, don't you? I had been deployed and was now at school, and she still was not pining to see me. As we say in the intelligence gig, these are indicators. I should have paid attention to indicators, but I was preoccupied with my problems. Language training fell into a routine, or more like a rut. Early to class, studying through lunch in my classroom while eating my sandwich. More class than the drive home. TV dinner, or perhaps they call them frozen meals. More studying, watching some French jazz on YouTube, and then asleep by 10. Monks had more exciting lives in the abbeys, with the added benefit of being able to drink the beer they brewed. About 3 weeks after my briefing with the Tan Colonel, I was trying to make sense of the past pluperfect sense of some irregular verbs, but don't ask me to explain that. When the Greek lady, well, I think model might be a better description, knocked on the door of my classroom. She was the receptionist at the offices that passed for a language school. She poked her exquisite head around the door, and the little asymmetrical bobbed hairstyle longer on the right hung down interestingly. Her eyes were as blue as the Aegean Sea around the Isle of Lesbos, which is a phrase that ran through my head whenever I saw her sitting at the reception desk, looking at her phone and ignoring the students. She had never spoken to me, but I had heard her talking on the phone to the supervisor, and she sounded like she could have been an extra from the guns of Navarone. And for someone at a language school, her vocabulary was like someone who had learned English on a fishing trawler.
Excuse me, please.
Yes?
Your visiting is here.
And she stepped aside to admit a woman wearing a nicely tailored suit with a pencil skirt. The skirt and jacket was pale yellow, and she had a black ruffled blouse. She was tall and had a full head of black hair with much body, parted in the middle and hanging to her shoulders with a little flip. She was wearing black heels and pantyhose. She was very professional and looked like she was about to serve me a subpoena.
Captain Stern.
This was not a question. She closed the door as Sophia backed away.
You have proven difficult to contact. You are going to have to make yourself more accessible.
I had risen to my feet, since that is what gentlemen do when they are sitting and are approached by someone, especially a woman, but I admit to being a little slow on the uptake. More accessible? And you seem to have me at a disadvantage. Who are you? She walked over to the table between us and put out her hand.
My name is not particularly important. But what is important is that I have seen Citizen Kane 41 times.
My tradecraft needed work. I shook Yellow's hand, but stared at her like she had slapped me with a fish. I did not speak for what felt like a minute, but it was probably 3 seconds. Then I realized what was going on. Is that right? Orson Welles is a poser, but I have seen Magnificent Andersons 5 times. Then it was her turn to look puzzled.
Magnificent Andersons. Is that a movie?
Yes, it was Welles' follow-up to Citizen Kane, but it was released in December of 1941, and it turns out folks were, too distracted to watch movies. Sort of like how Zoolander bombed in September of '01.
Frightfully interesting, I am sure, to cinema historians, but you will be discussing movies with individuals considerably less interested in them than your average film buff. I recommend mentioning only contemporary movies or classics that people have, heard of.
She did not smile, and her eyes stayed flat. I figured she was a high-ranking something or other, so I threw in a quick, "Aye, ma'am," since "aye" or "aye," is how Marines acknowledge receiving and understanding an order. She confirmed she was a high-ranking something or other when she said,
"Very well. Have a seat, Captain. As I mentioned, this job requires that you be out in places where you can be approached by those who would be, let's say, interested in striking up a conversation, and not just about movies. And you can consider that your mission has already started."
She obviously had at least as much authority as the Tan Colonel, but I think she was from outside the Defense Department. It was probably one of those 3-letter agencies, not that it mattered much to me. She was giving the orders, and I was listening.
You will go to lunch at the food court. You will run in parks, do calisthenics outdoors, and study in the evenings at Starbucks. No one can approach you in your cave or up here. Do you understand me?
Yes, ma'am. I thought I was supposed to bear down on the language to score high enough to get admittance to graduate school.
Your language is fine, Captain Stern. You are probably ready to go right now, but we still need to get some logistics in place. Carry on with your studies, but get yourself some fresh air.
Her eyes defied me to ask a question, so I didn't. She stood up and smoothed her skirt.
One more thing, Captain Stern. You are to request credentials in the secure meeting location from anyone who gives you the countersign. Colonel by the Sea explained that to you, did he not?
I nodded, but she asked again.
Did he not?
Yes, ma'am.
Very well. Do not make that mistake again.
She pivoted and walked out without looking back. That was a nice break from my routine lunch. Having some spook in a skirt bust my bravos. Busting my bravos seemed like something the higher-ups enjoyed doing to boy spy Jack Stern. I may have blown it by not asking for ID, but she was wrong that no one would find me in my hovel. Lieutenant Stackhouse dropped by a couple of nights later with a 6-pack of beer. I heard a knock at my door, so I picked up my Taurus Officer .45 caliber compact pistol on the table beside me. You can't be too careful, especially in the rough neighborhood I was in. I stood beside the hinges and reached over to point the pistol at the peephole. Someone with bad intentions might try to gauge my location by watching the light blink out of the peephole. Over on the side was better if someone wanted to stick me with an ice pick or take a shot through the door. But instead I heard a pleasant voice say,
"It's Melinda Stackhouse. May I come in?"
Lieutenant Stackhouse? What was she doing here? And how did she find my apartment? Not that I was living covertly. It is just that finding someone in a complex of 100 doors takes more effort than none. I guess I could get the answer to my questions by opening the door. I peeked and saw that she was in a decidedly unmilitary white spaghetti-strap top, was actually just a visor with her hair in a ponytail sticking out of the top. What looked like a penguin emblem was on the front of her white visor, and she was carrying beer. I could afford to be sociable. I slipped the pistol into my waistband at the small of my back. I moved the high-security chain to the side, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door to admit her.